Derek Newman could barely grasp what was unfolding in front of him. He sat across from his house, on the sidewalk, watching men in gas masks and protective gear enter his home with an array of equipment. For the past 2 days, his family noticed the peculiar bubbles forming in their ceiling, but none of them had any idea that their lives were at risk. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. It all began abruptly one night. Derek had just finished tucking his sons into bed and was heading to the kitchen. That's when he heard the strange noise above him. Initially, it was only audible from one spot in their house. He could hear small droplets falling onto a hard surface. Yet, when he glanced up at the ceiling, nothing seemed amiss. He assumed it was a minor issue that would resolve itself. The moment Derek moved away from that specific spot in the hallway, the noise vanished. He spent the rest of the night watching TV without a second thought. It seemed so insignificant that he didn't even bring it up with his wife. He slept peacefully, and by the next morning, it had completely slipped from his mind. But a reminder was imminent. The morning started like any other. Derek got up and began preparing for his day. He was always in charge of making the morning coffee. Then, walking down the hallways toward the kitchen, he heard it again. It was the exact same noise from the previous night, but now it was significantly louder. With a deep sigh, he realized there was a leak in their roof. He didn't have the time or the patience to deal with this right now. He couldn't address the issue immediately. With work in an hour and a half, and still needing to make coffee and get the kids ready to go to school, this was a terrible time for a problem like this. Derek continued with his morning routine as usual, trying to ignore the issue. After Derek left to go to work, he soon forgot about the leak. His schedule for the day was packed and demanded his full attention. After hours passed, it was finally time to return home. But as he entered the house, the sound of spraying liquid greeted him. He was horrified to find multiple bubbles in the ceiling. He looked around himself with wide eyes, astonished by the look of the place. Over the last 10 hours, the flooding had gotten a lot worse. He assumed they had a burst pipe or something, and now he had to deal with the mess. His wife would be home with the children at any second, and he had to get this sorted before their entire home got flooded. He placed his briefcase on the ground before grabbing his phone. He decided to call an old friend. Lucio was an experienced plumber who had worked on their house for the past decade. He knew what he was doing, and Derek trusted him above anyone else. After explaining the situation to Lucio, the plumber agreed to be there in no more than 10 minutes. As he waited on the front porch, his wife returned with their 2 children. As soon as he explained the situation to them, they were keen to see it for themselves. Elena and the kids were in the house when Lucio arrived. He had come with 2 of his fellow plumbers, and they expected the job to last no more than 2 hours. They grabbed their tools from the back of the truck before meeting up with Derek. He explained the situation and led the men into his home. When he walked in, the bubbles had gotten even bigger. One was right above their television, and it was threatening to burst at any second. "Do you think you could do something about this?" Derek turned to Lucio. He chuckled and placed his toolbox on the floor. "Of course we can," he assured him. Before long, the 3 plumbers ventured into the ceiling to fix the problem. Derek waited in the living room with his wife and children. But just a second later, a small crack appeared in one of the bubbles, sending a small stream of liquid onto their floor. The smell was nauseating. It smelled strongly of chemicals, which confused Derek. Derek got up to investigate the small stream of liquid. It didn't look like water, nor did it smell like water. He was about to place a finger under the stream when he heard a yell. "Get out!" Lucio called through the house as he and the other 2 men rushed down the small ladder that led to the ceiling. Derek was confused as he looked up at the man. What on earth was going on? "You have to get out now. It's not water. There's a chemical container up there. It's leaking from the container," he said as he rushed into the living room. "You need to evacuate right now." Derek's eyes widened as he and his wife gathered the kids and began escorting them out of the front door. As Elena sat the children on the curb outside, Derek stood with Lucio. The plumber wasted no time as he called 911, informing them of the hazardous substances. Derek couldn't believe what had happened. Why on earth was there a chemical container in their ceiling? It certainly wasn't them who put it there. For the last few years, he and his family had been living right underneath something so dangerous. As he waited for the emergency services to arrive, he made his way to his wife and children and sat beside them on the curb. He was beside himself with worry. What if the bubbles burst? What if their entire house became flooded with the substance? Everything would be ruined, and he couldn't afford that. Noticing the stressed look on his face, Elena took his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Everything will be all right," she said. Before long, emergency services arrived. Derek couldn't believe what was happening. He sat on the curb across from his house, watching as men in protective gear and gas masks walked into his home with all kinds of equipment. For the last 2 days, he and his family had noticed the strange bubbles forming under the paint of their but they had no idea that their lives were in danger. Only now did he fully understand the gravity of the situation. Lucio remained close to the house as he spoke to the workers about the situation. They were lucky that Lucio had told them to evacuate when they did. Just minutes after they got out, the large bubble above the television had burst. Some damage had been done, but thankfully, no one got hurt. After speaking to the men, Lucio made his way to Derek. "They just came back to me. Apparently the substance is hydrofluoric acid," Lucio said, rubbing a hand across his forehead. He understood the gravity of the situation. "It might take a while before you guys can move back in." Derek couldn't believe it. It was so much worse than he thought, but he was grateful that his family was all right. "We can stay with family until this is sorted out," he assured Lucio. They never found out how the container had gotten into their ceiling. They believed it had been there since they moved in. It took a few weeks, but eventually, their home was safe for them to live in again. A lot of their electronic devices and furniture were ruined, but they didn't mind repurchasing them. As long as his family was safe, Derek was relieved.